All right, how's it going, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Forward Thinking Founders, where we talk to founders about their companies, their visions for the future, and how the two collide. I am so excited today to have on the show Julia Enthoven, who is the CEO and co-founder of Kapwing on the show today. Julia, how's it going?
Hi, I'm good. How about you, Matt?
I'm doing really well. I'm very excited to be talking to you today. It's been a little while since we last talked, a couple of years ago, and you've come such a far way. So I'm stoked to have you on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
No problem. So let's just dive right into it. Kapwing, tell us about what you're working on. What is your company?
Yeah, so Kapwing is an online image and video editor. So we help people make multimedia formats in the browser. Everything from adding subtitles or making like a quick video collage to making like a travel video or some sort of content marketing for work. Kapwing can help you with any kind of video, image, or GIF format. And it's totally free to use.
That's awesome. The fact that anyone can get on there and start kind of making videos is fantastic. This is it's an interesting idea in that it is something that anyone can use. Everyone has something to express. I think some people have fussled around with iMovie or Premiere or something like that. Like, I'd love to hear, why did you, what was the impetus behind starting this company?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what you just alluded to was a big part of the motivation for us originally starting Kapwing, or where the idea came from, which is just the pain point of using these like powerful desktop programs to make like quick edits or changes to a video or to like some type of multimedia. We felt a lot of that pain ourselves as consumers, and we wanted to make something that was just as good as we wanted it to be. It was just as sort of simple as it, quote unquote, should be for the average person to create those things. So I originally started Kapwing because with a coworker of mine from Google. I graduated in computer science and had sort of fallen in love with tech and product design. But I went to Google after school and was working there on search. Google is an amazing place to work, but it's also a huge company. And I had a sort of deep itch to work on something smaller, something I had more ownership over. And so I left with one of my coworkers to start working sort of on a startup and on our own ideas, and that led us to Kapwing. So we started Kapwing in September of 2017, almost actually a little bit more than 2 years ago now, which is wild.
Yeah, that's awesome. So much can happen in 2 years. By the way, congrats on your recent financing. That's super exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, you got it. So let's dive a little bit into the product, just to make sure the listeners understand the power of what you built, because really anyone can get on there and use it. So a use case could be, let's say, for this podcast, for example, let's say I wanted to use Kapwing and make some videos for it and make some, graphics for social media. What are some use cases that I could kind of do on Kapwing that then publish some video on the internet?
Yeah, so our mission is to enable digital storytellers and entertainers. So this podcast is a great example of a use case for that. Where I'm telling the story of Kapwing now, you have other founders who are telling the story of their companies, and you're recording these stories in audio and video formats to sort of share with an audience, with people that are really interested in what those people have to say. And some use cases, for example, are you might like clip down certain segments of this podcast in order to share it on social media or to send it to friends in the form of like a webinar or something like that. You might create something that has like a visual aspect to it, like maybe the words of what we're saying appear sort of as subtitles over like an image with the audio of the podcast playing. We call that like an audiogram format. You might publish that kind of audiogram on YouTube or Instagram or on another like visual content platform. Or you might make, a thumbnail or like a cover image for this podcast that you publish on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else this podcast would go, that sort of represents what this episode is about, with a title and a description of who's on the show, things like that. So for a podcast, which is an MP3 format, there's all sorts of different ways you sort of in different kinds of multimedia that you would syndicate that across platforms. And it would, it's inherently has sort of like a video and audio and a like image or graphic aspect. And that's exactly the thesis of Kapwing, is that you should be able to make all those things in one single studio or space.
The thing I love about that is if I wanted to accomplish anything you just said with that Kapwing, I think in my head what the alternatives are. And I used to be into videos, so I think about Premiere and booting it up and spending time in there. Whereas you just take something that shouldn't be that complicated and make it simple to people to create content with their podcasts or videos. And I just think that's fantastic. And there's no wonder, you're doing so well. I have a couple more questions for you about Kapwing specifically, and then we'll learn a little bit more about what the future looks like and, venture into some other topics. So I'm very curious. How did you get the name Kapwing? It's so fun to say. I just want to keep saying it. So I'm curious, where did it come from?
Yeah, so Kapwing came from Calvin and Hobbes. It's a comic strip that we love, and Bill Watterson, who's the original creator of Calvin and Hobbes, we think invented the word. He used it in his comics all the time as kind of the sound of something ricocheting or bouncing off of something else, like Kapwing. We decided to use the name because we love that origin. We love Calvin and Hobbes, and in some ways it was kind of like an original multimedia format, sort of like had words and pictures and sort of action and movement with described in the images. And so we loved that meaning, or we loved that origin. We also like the meaning. It's something moving fast, changing directions. It has a lot of velocity, agility in it. It's fun to say, like you said, and it also doesn't really have a literal meaning, which makes us really different than the other players in this space. Like Windows Movie Maker or like iMovie. It's a very literal description, but Kapwing is something sort of more blue sky. It has more room to grow into all sorts of different aspects of multimedia creation and hosting. And yeah, also very important, which most founders don't talk about, Kapwing was available. We were bootstrapping at the time, and the domain name kapwing.com was still on the open, was still available basically for $10 a year. And so when you are a bootstrapping founder, you can't afford to buy like a domain that costs millions of dollars or whatever over 5 years. And so Kapwing also was true to our culture and history in that way.
That's it's kind of interesting what the availability of domains are largely influences what a lot of companies get named. That was the case with my first company, Publoft. The domain was open, $10, snag it. In regards to Kapwing, when I hear it and I think about it, I also feel when I say the name, it's like, great, I'm making a video, I'm publishing it, and then Kapwing out into the internet, and it like bounces off the walls of the internet, on the Twitter, on the Facebook, on the LinkedIn. It's like Kapwing, 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 and I just can't get it out of my head now. And I hopefully, it'll be in my head for a while as I become a user and start using it. So that's awesome. So you touched for a second on the fact that in the beginning you were bootstrapping Kapwing, and you've wrote a good amount on why. You've actually written a pretty good amount on a lot of decisions that you've made with your company. I myself am a writer too, and I admire when other founders kind of document the story and share. And I can't help but to kind of observe your original thinking and kind of first principle thinking versus just going with what's popular. And being a first-time founder, I have to ask, where does your confidence for your decision-making come from when a lot of the decisions that you make may not be, super intuitive, but they're kind of turning out to be right?
So that is, first of all, thank you so much for the kind words. I also appreciate when founders write about their stories because, once a founder is really successful, a very later stage, it's hard for them to remember what it was like in the early days. So it's always refreshing to read about a founder who's just getting started. And the inspiration for our blog came from other founders before us, people like the Canny founders writing articles about their growth that I really admired. And so, definitely shout out to them. I think in terms of first principles thinking, I definitely don't have, I would say I don't have like a huge amount of confidence as a founder. I always felt like there were these entrepreneurs that I admired, but I saw as just having, so much conviction, just being so sure of themselves, kind of going against all odds, so sure that they were right and they were going to make it. I've always been someone who is super open to discussing and debating what the right option is. And I've never been satisfied with someone just like telling me this is the way that it's done or this is the right thing. I've always been someone who's really insists on an explanation about why that thing is, why that's true. I mean, my friends have joked about me as like a second grader, like asking why certain things were true that, I don't know, like why we had to wear these shoes in our school uniforms or whatever else, that were kind of I saw as being arbitrary rules. So I would say that like definitely that's part of my personality. When it comes to things for your company, I think there's a certain kind of intuition you develop around what things are set in stone because people have tried and experimented and done different things and realized that like this is the way to do them, versus like which things are things that you need to innovate on. And honestly, like I feel that with Kapwing, we got lucky in some ways because we had experience with product development, but we had no experience with marketing at all. And so all of our experience with marketing came from just absolutely first principles, just like throwing things at the wall, seeing what stuck. And I actually think that was a huge advantage for us because rather than leaning on some pre-existing knowledge or set of experiences around whatever, like email marketing or social ads, we just went out and got traction like any way we knew how. And that was very successful for us.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And, taking those first principle kind of thoughts on marketing and just making sure you're making the right decision, not because someone said it was, but because, it actually is the right decision, I think will serve you really well moving forward, with Kapwing. And speaking of which, I do want to talk about what the future looks like with your company. So you've come a long way. It's been 2 years. You've raised a really fair amount of money. Just closed your A. Like, what is the direction that you're rowing in? And if you can paint a vision where 1 million or 1 billion people are using Kapwing, what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So we want Kapwing to be the place where you go if you need to make something that's related to multimedia. So if you need to design like an image or create a GIF, like an animation, or make some sort of like audio or video clip or record a song or do any kind of these tasks that we were talking about before, do anything to manipulate different multimedia formats, we want you to be able to come to Kapwing and do that. And like I said, our vision is around enabling digital storytelling and entertainment. So we want people to be able to, share the things that they learn, the things they know, share their stories and their messages with the world in a really accessible, easy way, and not have it be something that, you have to have a really powerful laptop or a film school degree to be able to access and know how to use. So my vision for, the future of Kapwing is that all sorts of creative companies, universities, organizations will license it to enable their people to be creative, and that we'll have sort of a free tier for the general consumer also. I think that this kind of fits into, a lot of my thinking about the future, which I'm sure we'll talk about soon. But I think that these kinds of multimedia formats like video, audio, they're becoming more and more important in all sorts of different domains. And we want Kapwing to be the like fully cloud-based, cross-device, you can use it anywhere, platform where you can create, share, and store your multimedia creations.
All right, that's an awesome vision for the future, and I see it happening with a tool that is, it's fun to use. I know I've tooled around with it in the last couple of weeks, and your brand is just fantastic. So I feel like you're all set up to get on that rocket ship. You already are on the rocket ship, so that's awesome. So you mentioned, lightly some of things that you're interested in regards to the future. I'd love to kind of back a little bit away from Kapwing and just talk in general about the future and what interests you. So I'd love to know what trends, whether they be in media or something entirely unrelated, interest you, and why do they interest you?
Yeah, so I would say there's a few trends that interest me when I like think about productivity and how sort of what the future of work will look like. The first is that we've seen this happening over the last 5 years, and I really believe it will continue over the next 10 years, which is this expectation from workers that their software will, first of all, be something that's really delightful and simple, easy to use, something that almost feels like a consumer product. It's having just like a really high bar for the sort of products they use at work. And the second is that consumers or that office workers now have this expectation that their software will work on every device. It'll work on both their computer and on their phone, since both the computer and the phone have been, and I really believe will continue to be, important instruments of productivity going forward, especially for something like video and images. Um, and that like expectation of moving towards sort of like cloud-based cross-device products. I think you can see it with like Google Docs, people moving from Microsoft Word to Google Docs or to, other cloud-based, Microsoft cloud-based products. You see it in the ways people are changing from using something like Photoshop to using Canva and sort of online editors. We see it with Figma and people moving from like Sketch or Adobe Illustrator into something cloud-based and collaborative like Figma or InVision, and in all sorts of other verticals where software that you used to install onto your computer is now sort of moving into the web and works on every device. So I think that Kapwing is, it's very much on that, in the same vein as that trend. Another one I think is that there are all sorts of tasks that are being automated away by things that used to be jobs, 20 years ago that are no longer jobs. And I think that will continue. I think that people will, the jobs that people are doing today will be, many of them will be replaced by, by machines basically going forward and artificial intelligence software. And I think that those people will move into different careers. They'll move into careers that are related to storytelling, entertainment, media, and recreation, travel, leisure, all these other things that Kapwing definitely like has a relationship with in some ways. So I think those are two big trends that are happening. And I think those are eminent. In the next 10 years, I think we will see those industries rising, and I also think we'll see, more and more software moving into the cloud, becoming collaborative.
Those are both very insightful, predictions and thoughts on the future. I want to dive into your first one for a second. That's something I notice a lot too. I take from what you said, changing from complicated software to kind of potentially easier to use software on the cloud. It's lowering the barrier for people to get in there and start designing on Canva or making awesome visuals, graphics, or videos, like on Kapwing. And it kind of makes me think of what's happening with, this quote unquote maker movement, with no code coming into the fold and like people will be being able to build apps without learning to code. Do you think that there's going to be a convergence of the first and the second trend that you mentioned, like where the ability to create is so much easier than it was two decades ago? Then the professions that people displaced by jobs will just turn into like people starting companies because it's a lot easier than it used to be. Do you see anything happening in that regard?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there's lots of different things you're kind of hinting at there. One thing that you're hinting at is just like, are more people going to be entrepreneurs and sort of start their own things or sort of move between different roles? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, big companies, as they like automate more and more jobs, there's going to be these, like I said, more jobs which are oriented towards service, leisure, art and entertainment, storytelling, things like that, where it's less of like a corporate profession and more of an entrepreneurial endeavor. And so I think that people will definitely continue to move into sort of more entrepreneurial careers as that trend continues to move forward. The second thing that you were hinting at there is is there this convergence of like cloud-based productivity software that makes work a lot easier and, being able to start your own thing or your own company. I think, that absolutely that's true in a lot of different ways. One way is that it's so much easier for an individual to tell their story online. If they can craft a story and craft a brand across all of their channels and across all of sort of like on the internet, then it's much easier for them to reach the audience that needs them. And so I think that's, I don't think it's so much about like being able to code or like make technology as it is about being able to express your personality and your product or service and your brand. That's so important for people to create presence online.
Yeah, that's very insightful, and I agree with all of that. It's an interesting time to be in tech. I feel like so much has happened in the last 2 decades, but the next 2 decades there's going to be tons more progress. So that's going to be an interesting ride. So I have a couple more questions for you in regards to your kind of your mindset just towards entrepreneurship and running a company. I want to dive a little deeper into the fact that you are I believe you're a first-time founder because you were working at Google, and then you started Kapwing, and and so was your co-founder, but you're doing everything. You're kind of doing everything right, and not just doing everything right. This is external, of course. Internally, everything's probably broken, just like any startup. But from my perspective, you're not just doing kind of the right things, but you're talking about them in such an coming from a place of such authority. What advice would you have for other first-time founders who are maybe feel like they have imposter syndrome, whereas it's your first time, but you're just blazing the trail and doing what you think is right, and making a great company? What advice would you have for them?
Wow, I still feel like I have so much imposter syndrome myself. So I'm honored to hear you say that. But a few things I would say. So one is, for first-time founders, like the best way to learn is to do. And this is one of the, like, we have it on the wall at Kapwing. It's one of our principles. But I think that, to me, that means really two different things. Like the first is, don't wait until your thing or your idea is perfect before you start trying to do it, or before you start trying to get traction. If you could put it out there today, it would be like pretty imperfect, or you could put it out there in 2 months and it would be like much better. Put it out today, because you're going to learn so much more by just putting things out there in the world than you will if you keep them to yourself. The second thing is, I would say I always have embraced the likelihood of failure. And sometimes people think that's like an irrational thing to say, but most startups fail, most ideas are not good. And to me, that's not too scary, because if you like start out with sort of low expectations of what's going to happen, then every step you take is just one more step towards success or towards your dreams. And I think that's when I talk to other entrepreneurs who are at an earlier stage than me, those are like the two biggest mistakes that I see. The first just being that people are trying to get it perfect before they try to get traction. And the second is that people, they're too wrapped up in their own solution. They have too much conviction and too much confidence. And they're just like, I'm going to make the future look like this, and I know what it's going to be. For us, like, I always was like, I have an opinion about it, but I'm going to go like test out what that is. And there were many times when we failed. I don't know if you know this, Matt, but my co-founder and I worked on a different idea for 2.5 months before we worked on Kapwing. And it wasn't working, so we shut it down. And it was a great idea. I still believe one day it will exist, but we couldn't get any traction for it. And I was very grateful that we were able to shut it down so quickly, even though it was hard at the time. It was definitely the right decision for us. And if we hadn't shut it down, we never would have gotten to Kapwing. So I definitely encourage founders to have humility around their own, their own ideas, and really trust the ideas that are working in the market.
Yeah, that's great advice, and advice I'll take myself. You're doing great things, and it's cool to watch watch it happen. I have a couple more questions for you, and then we'll wrap it up. So I'd love to hear one of the biggest things that you maybe have learned on your journey so far, You've gotten it to the point where you obviously have a good amount of traction, and you're attracting these Series A investors. What's one of the things that you have maybe learned over the past 2 years that isn't super obvious? Something that you didn't think you would learn going into it, but now it's obvious on the other side.
That's interesting. Gosh, I've learned just so much that it's hard for me to synthesize into just like one or two very specific learnings. I would say one thing is just one thing I've realized is that so much of the literature is written by investors. So much of the literature is actually written by people that have never done it themselves. And, maybe that sounds counterintuitive to you. You're like, oh, but this investor, they've invested in all these companies. They know so much about how to grow successful companies. But investing in successful companies is not the same as growing a successful company. And I think that, that distinction I've realized has become like, it's basically become a very important learning for me because I've become to kind of like distrust a lot of sort of like the literature and the quote unquote like gurus around entrepreneurship. Many of those gurus either have never been an operator or were only an operator like 20 years ago when they started their company. Rather than operators, in this environment in 2019. And so I would say that's a very first learning is just like, yeah, most of the literature is from the investor's perspective, not from the entrepreneur's perspective. And the best entrepreneurs form really close peer relationships with other entrepreneurs that are at their level, not investors, basically. I would say the second thing that I've learned about is sort of the difference between hype and business value. That basically being able to position your product and tell a story in a way that makes you seem like an attractive company and an attractive entrepreneur is not the same thing as adding business value. This is something that I used to like scoff at because I used to be like, oh, I'm never going to be the kind of entrepreneur that like wants hype around my company. I'm always just going to care about like actually making things that people need and like actually building revenue and stuff like that. But what I've realized is that those two actually, that basically they're both very important. And to be the CEO of a successful company that actually has a huge amount of revenue and has a really impactful product, you need to also have like legitimacy and kind of some hype to attract employees, to attract investors, to attract partners, and all those other things. And so you shouldn't go too heavily on one or the other, but I do think like the best entrepreneurs think about both and balance both.
That's a very interesting dichotomy. And I've never heard that before, but it definitely makes a lot of sense. So that's fantastic. So, you mentioned in there that you have, it's important that you have close peers that are founders, not necessarily investors, that you kind of keep close while building a company. I'd be curious to know who are either some peers or role models that you look up to that have kind of helped you along the way, from even before Kapwing now to where you are today.
Wow, I'm so glad you asked this question because I just have benefited so much from these people's help. So Dylan Field, who's the CEO of Figma, has been a huge role model and friend to me and to my co-founder. He and Eric, my co-founder, actually went to middle school together, amazingly. So I have just learned so much from Dylan about how to raise money, how to hire people, so many other things. Dylan's a later stage founder than me. So I would say he's like less of a peer and more of like an advisor role model. But since he's our age, that makes him like, it's easier to talk to him. He's super relatable. Garrett Lord, who's the CEO of Handshake, has also been a big role model and mentor of mine. I actually interviewed at Handshake before I started Kapwing, back when I was trying to decide if I wanted to go somewhere else after Google or try to do my own thing. And now I like feel bad about it because I know how hard hiring is, but I basically turned down Garrett's offer, and he has so graciously and just like in an inspiring way been a role model and mentor for mine as I grew my own business. On the sort of like more my peers, Dion Nicholas, who's the CEO of Forethought, has been like a great friend and is sort of just like one step ahead of me, which is the best kind of friend because he's always just like dealing with the same challenges, but just 1 month ahead of us. And wow, so many other founders, the founders of Down Dog, have been good friends and have referred several people to our company. Many others who, the list is just too long to even mention here, but people that I've met mostly organically, socially, like in San Francisco, who have just been so supportive and also just like helped a lot with sort of the founder loneliness because they understand what it's like to care so much about your company.
What a great answer. I'm sure they all appreciate it. And everyone, that you're thinking, that you may not have mentioned. I think it's important that everyone plays a role in someone's journey. And it's, like if I had a conversation with someone 3 years ago and they go off to do something, it's always good to know that I like a small part of what I said, help them out. And it's kind of, what's the quote? You're the product of the 5 people you spend this time around. So make sure they're smart people that are helping you out, that are gracious. So that's fantastic. Well, I have one last question for you. I already asked, not on purpose, the typical last question that I ask, which is, what advice would you have for someone trying to get into starting a company? So I have a different last question for you. And it's more of a comedy question. So I saw on Twitter a couple of days ago, after you closed your round, you were sharing awesome company swag that VCs, have been giving you. My question to you is, what is on your wish list for the coolest piece of swag that you could ever imagine getting?
Yes, what an amazing question. So actually swag is kind of hard to make, actually custom swag. I'm trying to investigate how we should make custom swag right now for Kapwing. But among some custom swag that's on my wish list is a director's chair, which is one of those kind of higher chairs like they have in Hollywood, but Kapwing style. And what they call clapper boards, which are the things that they go take one, clap, take one. But purple and Kapwing colors. So yeah, having a director's chair and a clapperboard would be awesome. But we also are constantly thinking about how can we put the Kapwing kitten on different things that help people make videos and stuff like that, like selfie sticks or GoPro accessories or tripods, stuff like that. So yeah, we are definitely trying to make our own swag, and we super appreciate the swag that Village Global and CRV sent to us after the Series A financing.
If anyone's listening and you have the hookups to a director's chair or a clapper that you can customize, you know who to talk to.
Exactly.
My last question for you is, what you're working on is fantastic. You've had awesome success. You still have a long way to go, which is exciting. If someone wants to follow along with your journey, where can they learn about Kapwing, and where can they learn more about you?
Yeah, so like you already mentioned, we have a blog about the journey of growing a company. You can check it out at kapwing.com/blog. And also we are super actively hiring. So if you live in San Francisco, you can also come to our jobs page, kapwing.com/jobs, and check out our open roles. And we are everywhere on social media. So follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. I myself answer all of our tweets, all of the messages that we get in on social media. So we're super accessible. Please reach out. We love hearing from people that use the product or other entrepreneurs that are trying to grow their own thing.
All right. You all heard it here first. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it, Matt.